Hey guys, welcome back to the Geography Academy. Remember, this video is just a small part of a much larger course that's available below if you just follow the links and instructions. This is Unit 4B for diverse places. We have population dynamics and shaping places first. Looking at the population change, we can see a drastic increase in the last kind of 2,000 years and then an incredible increase in the last 200 years of those 2,000 years. This is to say that there was only 1 billion people roughly on the planet at 1804 and now we're up over 7.5. So we can see here with modern history the changes that came from the Industrial Revolution, moving forward the advancement of technology. Now the real thing is thinking about, well, we're only up to about here now, and we can see this growth through technology. For example, if we think about creating more resources for more people, and having more food and increasing food capacity, the ability to have wealth, new technology in order to build better homes, safety, spread of medication. All of these things have meant that we live for longer, and it also means that young people then live on to have children, which increases the population. So we see the birth rates increasing for a long time. Now we get to this peak point that we're at now, and we can see that it can go one of three ways. It can continue to go, which is a UN estimate high. It can start to curve out and then can just level off, or it can continue then, it can decrease then afterwards as well. So these are the three sort of concepts we're thinking about now. Like, what can we anticipate happening? We're going to talk about what are the causes for this spike and the potential for it to decrease so dramatically in the near future. So let's have a look. Population then is rising at a rapid rate. And if we break it into three distinct sections, the more developed countries then are increasing but very slowly and gradually and might level off. We're getting into like 2030, 2050 here as well. Less developed countries are much larger in terms of their population, and they're also increasing at a much more rapid rate. And the least developed countries will be the last ones to slow down, with the rate continuing up after that. So they'll end up having a high percentage of the world's population as well. We see the less developed countries that aren't the least developed countries coming in there with the high amount of statistics. They could be like middle income countries, newly emerging economies, for example. So that's the general trend right now. If we're thinking about natural change, like natural increase, this is the difference between birth rate and death rate. Birth rate measured people born out of every 1,000 of the population, and death rate the people who die every per 1,000 of the population. It's divided down so we can compare accurately what's going on in countries, because populations are so different country to country. So it's a natural increase if the birth rate is greater than the death rate, and a natural decrease if the death rate is greater than the birth rate. But we also need to consider net migration. It's immigration minus emigration. Emigration, the number of migrants who the country is receiving per year per 1,000 of the population, and emigration, the number of people who are migrating out of the country per 1,000 of the population. So the net migration then can be positive or negative. Positive means you're gaining more people, which means there's more immigrants than emigrants. And then a negative would mean that more people are leaving, meaning you would have more emigrants than immigrants. The GNI then is a measurement of development indicator, and we can see here the GDP per capita being used for that. And the concept is then these are all development indicators here. We have life expectancy, where we can see the difference between Japan and Central African Republic, for example, is 31 years. That's quite a considerable difference then between the two countries, and shows that there is a distinctive lack of medical care and food and resource security in the Central African Republic. Literacy rates then show the literacy rates of someone over 15 if they're able to read and write. And then we have infant mortality rates, the number of deaths of a child between 0 and 1 per 1,000 live births in the same year. So this is showing a drastic difference between Sierra Leone and Iceland, down to just 2. The Human Development Index is a combination of a few different ideas that just show healthcare, education, and living standards connected. So we can understand that not all countries' level of development is based off economic value, that we may have to look at different characteristics, such as education for adults, and seeing the general education at that stage and see what they can actually produce for the country, as well as schooling for children in entering age. How many years will they be in there? Life expectancy at birth and GNI per capita. GNI then taking the GDP and all the remittances that is sent into a country. Remittances then regarding the money that is sent back by migrants to the country as well. Fertility rate is the live births per 1,000 women between ages 15 and 45 per year. And this tends to have trends in LICs of high fertility rates, slowly reducing fertility rate in MICs and HICs with fertility rates lower than most, and some are below 2.1, which is the replacement level, meaning that as the death rate is occurring, if you have a fertility of 2.1, you should be able to replace the population and maintain the size. So this can be affected by a whole host of reasons, where we look at healthcare, sustainable food resources, if they have environmental hazards or not in the area. And in HICs, a lot of people don't do manual labor, so they don't require large families to help out with like subsistence farming, for example. Socially, then, we can see religion can have an influence with regards to some religions then forbidding contraceptions and abortions. And so we see there are differences because of that. The areas as well in demographics, we can see a high infant mortality rate is usually linked to a high fertility rate. So this is also because the expectation that you want to have a larger family size, but you might expect that some of your children won't make it to adulthood. In a lot of these cases, it's also looked at just culturally to have a bigger family. The lack of contraception and abortions then in regions means that some of the areas then will tend to just have bigger families and celebrate them. But also we have the idea of maybe very little pensions and things like that, which means that a lot of families will rely on their children for support then when they're older. The pronatalist policies then is to encourage people to have children, antenatal policies to reduce the amount of children and reduce the fertility rate. So a pronatalist policy could be like tax breaks and incentives for parents, and then antenatalist could be fining and making it more expensive to have children. So we saw there like some extreme countries went through it, like having a 1 or 2 child policy. Now, women's role in society is probably the biggest influencing factor a lot on development and showing the changes then in the diversity of places. So we can see fertility rate being quite high in areas then where women's rights are a bit lower. So in countries where there is a high fertility rate, we can expect less they have fewer years of education and opportunity, and they'll have less career driven because they'll have less potential for different types of industries. We also see like religious influence being very strong, so it could reduce the amount of abortions and use of contraceptives. So culturally accepted then to be a full-time caregiver and less pressure on the idea of careers. So in this case, we can see education is a real key to that area there, and reducing the amount of teenage marriages as well is a key factor to having family when you're a little bit older, and reducing down the fertility rates. So we can change this in loads of places, and a lot of places are changing, but these tend to be the highest fertility rates tend to be in the least developed countries and LICs. Low fertility rates tend to be in developed countries. We see there where there's a protection on women's rights and gender equality and a history of moving in that direction for a while. We see more years in education into the 20s, so getting like a third level education, more career opportunities and the rights to different jobs, later marriages, financial independence and access to contraceptives and family planning and abortions gives more pro-choice to a lot of females in those countries, and less stress on cultural norm to marry than in kind of teenage years like it is in LICs. So due to this change, and really due to these societies, we can see completely different fertility rates, and therefore there's a huge difference between the countries that operate in both sections of that. Mortality rates then tell us a lot about the country in terms of the death rates per thousand, and we see the general trends is that LICs tend to have death rates